What am I saying again?
This is MPW.
MPW.
The podcast.
With your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MPW Podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and today we are so excited to be talking to Rayna Zemel. So Rayna is a playback engineer, a live show designer, a composer, a producer, amongst so many things. So great to have you with us today, Rayna.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is a big honor, so thank you.
Oh, absolute pleasure. So you're in LA and maybe halfway through your day. So what's been happening today? What have you been working on?
So today I actually do very mundane things because my industry is shut down right now. So I do Photoshop editing for my mom's interior design company. And also, I mean, we're going to keep it real right now. This is what, you got to hustle as much as you can. And also, I am doing some social media posts for a film that I produced and composed and sort of started and did pictures for. And it's been doing really well. So I'm just kind of trying to handle social media marketing, which is not my wheelhouse. So yeah, busy day.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Oh, amazing. Definitely something I had to kind of learn as I went running MPW. But tell me a bit about this film. That sounds incredible.
So my wife owns a film production company, and we made a short film called We Can't Breathe. And it is about the George Floyd uprisings that happened in the U.S. during the summer of 2020. And basically the way that it happened is that I also dabble in photography, and I had a camera, and I saw the way that the media in the U.S. was constructing a narrative of what was happening on the ground that wasn't true. So I just decided to grab a camera and just start taking pictures. And then my wife's business partner took his camera and started filming when the National Guard came in, and there was like army tanks on the streets. And then it just became this organic process of we're now going to tell a story about, this 1 month in Los Angeles where there was this huge reckoning of racial relations in and accountability for police brutality, because that's a big problem here in the States. So yeah, we did a 8-minute and 46-second long documentary, which is as long as the Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck. So yeah, this was a very, very personal piece, and one that came together serendipitously. But it's going like gangbusters right now on the film festival circuit. So it's always nice to be validated for these types of things.
Definitely. And yeah, that must feel so good. And I think sometimes when you start these projects, you're not really sure where it's going to go, and you're not making it for that reason. But then when it gets picked up, it's definitely, it feels good that maybe more people will see it and get something out of it than you initially thought.
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing. So well done, Rayna. And that's just a whole other side to everything else that you're doing. Film producer.
Just kind of fell into it. Like I've fallen into every other job that I've had.
Yeah, it sounds like it, which is incredible. And like even, you were saying now using your Photoshop skills to help with your mum's business. And so I guess it's just such a strange time for everyone in this industry, and you just got to adapt as best I guess we all can, and just hope things sort of go back to normal soonish. Yeah. But I'd love to hear a bit more about you, Rayna, and your journey into music and where you are today. And you've had such an incredible career and worked with so many amazing artists. So yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. So I guess my elevator pitch. So I moved out here to LA in 2009, and I went to school at LA Recording School. And, it wasn't a degree program. It was more of a certification. Learned how to do audio engineering, more on the tech side. When I moved out here, I didn't really have aspirations to be an artist, but I knew that I wanted to work in some way in the music industry space, and particularly on the tech side, because I've always been, kind of tech minded, if you will, and bounced around in jobs for a couple of years. And then I ended up, just odd jobs working at Atlantic Recording as a recording engineer. I was working at Paramount Recording Studios as an engineer as well. And it was there that I met one of my mentors, this guy by the name of Che Pope. And at the time, he was an executive at Good Music. And this was when I was getting really deep into Ableton, teaching it. I actually ended up teaching at the school that I graduated from a couple years after I had graduated. And he introduced me to Kanye's playback engineer, this woman by the name of Laura Escude, who owns a company called Electronic Creatives. And he basically was just like, hey, this is a woman that does playback. You are a woman that does playback as well. There's not a lot of you. You guys should know each other.
Awesome.
So yeah, we got introduced and then became friends. And it wasn't like an automatic process. Like I met her and then I started touring. It was like 3 years later, just becoming friends with this whole group of DJs, playback engineers, MIDI technologists, controllerists. There's a pretty strong nerd audio tech community here in Los Angeles. And I just became a part of this community, and I ended up getting laid off from my teaching position. And then it turned out it was at the right time because I got a call saying there's this artist named Kaisa, and she's looking for a playback engineer. The budget's not large, and you need a job, kid? And I was like, yeah, I need a job. So you need to go on tour for 9 months. Perfect. Let's do it. And that's how I fell into it.
I love that. And it's funny how sometimes, and I don't know what was going through your mind when you got laid off initially, you can sometimes feel like, oh no, this is the worst thing ever. And then it ends up being the best thing ever because it allows you to explore an opportunity that maybe you would not have had otherwise.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it was definitely, I remember that tightening feeling you get in your lungs and you're like, and then, but then you're like, wait a second, I could pivot to something else. And you're not thinking this at the time. You're just hoping you can survive it.
Exactly.
But,
yeah, exactly. Oh, no, that's awesome. And I think sometimes when you say playback engineer to someone, they might not know what that is or like what the main job of a playback engineer is. So do you think you can define that for us?
Okay. So playback engineer I feel like it's one of the most misunderstood positions in the touring industry, but at the same time, the most vital, because it's the way that I kind of describe it to people that don't have any knowledge of, audio engineering, music, production. It's like being a DJ, but without any of the glory and all of the stress. That's the way that I can, because basically your job is you're playing backing tracks. You're taking that studio sound and you're translating that into a live setting. So in order to do that, you have to have a musical background because a lot of the times you have to be able to communicate with the artists. You have to communicate with music directors and be able to speak their language. But basically, playback engineering is you're taking stems, you're taking anything that a band is not playing, anything that a singer isn't singing, and you are constructing it in such a way that it can be played back on a front of house system. And also another part of my job is that I generate time code that goes to lights and to video. So all the audio and the video syncs up. And literally when I press play, that starts the show. When I press stop, that stops the show. So you can understand that it's a lot of pressure because if something goes wrong in my end, it's catastrophic. It will be
that is a lot of pressure.
But I'm the type of person. I'm very so like I'm very attracted towards like anxious and pressurized types of situations. I tend to thrive in those situations. So I think that's why I fell into it and thrived.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So when others might be having an absolute meltdown, you'll be like, this is the situation for me.
I mean, I may be having a meltdown, but it's just like, I'm like, ooh, yes, this is like drugs for me.
Oh, wow, that's hilarious. But yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so that helps to, I guess, clarify it for some people on that. So it just, in a way, it feels like so much power over the show for me.
Yes, it is.
Which, yeah. Cool. So did you study bits of playback engineering, or was it something that you sort of learnt just the way your career moved? Or how would you recommend someone would go about it if they were to want a career in that field?
So the way that I got into it, I did not study playback engineering. I've been doing this for 7 years now. So there wasn't any type of course that was specifically catered for people that are interested in doing playback engineering. I was teaching Ableton workshops, and I was teaching music production and Pro Tools and Logic. And I was able to apply the skills that I had just working in studios and in education to a live setting. But now there's, college and university programs that actually are like, yes, this is how you translate the studio to the stage. And there's companies now that, have playback courses that are specifically designed for people that want to do this. But for people that are trying to get into this and maybe don't have the financial means to, pay for a $5,000 program, I would think that the best way to do it is just to, if you're working with an artist, a lot of times if you're an engineer, you're also producing this artist. And then after you make the music, the next logical step is now you want to perform this. And, I've worked with artists before and just trying to figure out how we can take what we did in the studio and translate into that onto the stage. That's how I've also done a lot of playback gigs, is with artists that I've worked with.
That's really interesting, and something that I know, from experience just with my own live set or like live sets of people that I know, it's just such a, I think, tough thing to work out how to navigate if you're approaching that for the first time. Yeah, I don't think an artist would have a problem with a producer giving them a little, few tips, especially if they've done that before.
Yes.
Because it can be a quite overwhelming thing to navigate, I think, sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Maria Caterina. I'm from Ecuador, and this episode is brought to you by MPW membership. Did you know that all MPW members get access to monthly feedback on their tracks from an industry audio professional? This is the perfect resource if you're almost finished with your track and need that professional ear to help you with the final touches. This is a free feature for all MPW members. Take advantage of this awesome function and so many more using the link musicproductionforwomen.com/membership.
You've worked with some huge artists, Lana Del Rey, Lil Wayne, Dua Lipa, and so many more. How did you approach working with each client? Like, firstly, how did that come about? And is the process quite different between working with different artists?
Most of the gigs that I've gotten in the past 6 years, it's just usually been like an email or a text or a phone call. Someone just got my name from somebody who knows somebody. And as far as like the approach that I take, there's not a one size fits all approach, I don't think, because, every single person is different, and you kind of have to adapt to whatever that artist and their management style is. Some are like super boisterous and they like people that are super outgoing. And then others are like, we're a little bit more reserved, so you kind of have to pull that back, especially for me as I'm a fairly extroverted person. But the most important thing that I could say about working with artists is that you have to be able to communicate effectively. Communication is really the key to being successful as a playback engineer, because there's so many balls in the air, if you will. Like there's so many different things that you're handling at the same time. And, just being able to communicate clearly, okay, if someone in lighting department is asking me for time code, but someone at the front of house is asking me to turn down this part, this many dBs, and then, someone in monitors is telling me that they need this up, just be like, okay, I got you. I hear you. You're first. Give me a couple seconds. Got you. Next person, and you just have to just make sure that the communication lines are open, and that you're just basically, I like to under promise and over deliver, if that makes sense. And also manage expectations. A lot of it is managing expectations because people sometimes they want you to do some stuff that could really set you up for failure, and just being like, okay, I don't think this is a good idea. If you want to do this, I'm just going to write an email and just say I don't think this is a good idea. So there's a paper trail. So if it crashes and burns, I can be like, I told you so.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So there's a few different skills that you might not immediately associate with being a playback engineer, like communication. So, and it sounds like a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned also that you got a lot of these gigs through someone knowing about you or someone getting in touch with you. So would you say that networking is a really big part of this and going where you'd like to go in the industry?
Yes, networking it is probably 100% how I've gotten my actually no, it's not 100%. I would say it is about 90%. In my industry, I'm an outlier. It's a very homogenous the people that are playback engineers, out of all of the playback engineers that are working at A level, I'm the only woman of color, queer, and so it's very isolating and a little disturbing on some levels, but it's also you're very visible because they're like, oh, we're looking for a female playback engineer, and then they're like, oh, well, Rayna. we know her. Yeah, I mean, obviously, but yeah, it's a lot of networking, and you just have to. Again, it's a lot of code switching. You have to be able to talk to different people in different types of. You just have to be able to talk to different people and meet them on their level. So especially with touring, you're spending so much time with the people that you work with. There's no separation between your work life and your non-work life. I mean, the people that you tour with, you're sleeping next to them in a bus. You're spending your days off with them. You're eating all of your meals together. So you also have to just have a high level of emotional intelligence, to really thrive. And that can be assessed pretty easily just through a very casual exchange at, say a awards ceremony where you're trying to be like, oh, hi, so if you need a playback engineer, nice to meet you.
Yeah, wow. And is there a way that you manage, because obviously when you're working with so many different personalities and you're with them all the time, there's probably some people that you maybe just don't naturally gel with. Is there some advice that you have for managing that and kind of keeping the peace?
Well, yeah, I've been fired a lot. I'm just gonna. Yeah, no, I mean, and there's a certain type of personality that I just don't get along with in general. And I have realized as I've gotten older is that maybe to be not so reactionary, because sometimes people will just say or do things just to get a reaction out of you. And that's, if someone knows that they have the power to elicit a certain emotional response, that can be problematic. So the way that I have dealt with this moving forward is just I make sure that I work with people that I'm on the same level with, emotionally and intellectually. But for people that are just starting out, my first tour was extremely difficult. There was a lot of I was doing a lot of jobs that I wasn't getting paid for, and they were doing this because they knew that I was green, and they were just like, whatever, she'll do it. And it was a hazing experience. There was, it was a lot of this is just what you got to do if this is what you want to do. But just being really good at your job. I'm really good at my job, and I feel like this is just something that women are subject to more so than men, is that we don't have the same amount of chances to fail that men do. So I think that's the reason why so many women are when they do get hired, they're like, wow, this person is so good. Well, because we have to be, because we don't have those same type of chances to fail.
Yeah, well, that's true. And it's good that you found a strategy for dealing with certain people, because I'm sure that's not always easy.
Yes. And also, I have a wife that also is really good at writing emails. she's been, through a couple of litigation situations. So she knows how to speak in a lawyerly, legalese type of thing. So I can be
Always
like,
handy.
yeah. So I'm like, this is like just raw emotion, and she'll be like, okay, we need to tone this down, and yeah, don't say that.
Yeah. Writing emails is such an underrated skill. Like writing a good email is, I just get so excited when I get or when I send a really well-structured email.
Yes, me too.
So yeah,
as do I.
That's great. Yeah, very important skill. So tell me a bit about the process of a tour. Like when in an artist's tour managing process would you get involved, and what's, timeline wise, how does that work when from then to when the tour starts, and what do you need to get prepared before you even go on tour?
So it's it depends on the artist. I've had artists where they've emailed me 2 months in advance saying, hey, this is a show that we're doing and we would like you to be involved. And I'm, and then sometimes I don't hear from them until 2 days before rehearsal. And I don't know if we're like renting a playback system or if we're going to buy one and I have to build it. Like it just depends on, sometimes it can be really, it just depends on the artist. So, but I've also worked with artists that give me like a month and a half of advance and just let me know that, okay, so this is what we're doing and these are the dates. And so usually the process goes is that the first thing I do is that I get stems from either the musical director or the producer or the engineer. I have to get all the stems because that's what I have to import into my session.
Like in individual stems or like group stems, out of curiosity?
Usually they're group stems because I haven't worked on a lot of digital playback rigs that, basically you're not confined by the physical amount of outputs that you have. So usually there's stems, it's like, one, stereo track of drums, a mono track for bass, so on and so forth. The next step is usually communicating with the lighting director because again, I'm generating the time code that the lighting department uses to trigger their cues, for lights and for video. And a lot of that is just like, I have a folder full of time code and spreadsheets. And, I say, okay, so at this time, this is for this song and this time is for this song. And then I just start sending them the bounces. It's usually time code goes on the left and then the song goes on the right. So then they can program it and then make sure that I always make the spreadsheet because especially if it's a tour with an artist that has like a catalog of 95 different songs, you want to make sure that you're not re-recording over time code that's already being used for another song because that could be bad. And then that's my preparation before I get into actual rehearsals. And then, there's tech rehearsals where the artist isn't there and it's just making sure, all the different departments are talking to each other and all the technology works. And then as soon as that is done, then the artist comes in and then we can just run through the show a couple times and then you go on the tour.
Wow, interesting. I never actually thought about a tech rehearsal. Like you think, obviously there's rehearsals with the artist, but then to make sure that, now it seems obvious in a way that it's so important that everyone else is talking and making sure that that's all running smoothly. Yeah, you can almost cover if an artist stuffs up, but I guess you can't if everything drops out from a tech perspective.
Yeah, and also you don't want to be like working these things out like when the artist is in the room because they're just like waiting and you're just like, the pressure is on, it's like, okay, like, yeah, we need to handle all these issues before they come in because when the artist is there, they should be doing nothing but singing or dancing or, doing whatever they do to make sure that the actual show is going to be running the way that they want it to.
Cool. And how much do venues play a part in what you do specifically? So when you're preparing for the tour, is every venue, are the files different? Are the process for preparing different? Or?
The venues actually have nothing to, I have no vested interest in the venues because I am a self-contained unit. I bring all of my own equipment. I bring the laptops. I bring the table that I set up on, and I bring my own chair. So literally the venue is the only impact it has on my world is the space, like the physical space. So if sometimes some venues are really small and I'd be cramped, next to 17 other departments, but that's fine. But actually the venue itself doesn't really have any bearing on what I do.
Right. Okay. Because when I think about like a, live sound engineer, I guess the space in a way is important as far as how the sound is going to sound in that room. So that doesn't really impact you in what you do?
No, because I'm not a front of house engineer. So during the tech rehearsals, a lot of what I do is, I have all these individual stems and I'll adjust the clip gain individually for different instruments so that it will translate well to, multiple different venues. But as far as like all of my work takes place during rehearsals. So that actually when we go out on tour, it's just plug and play for me.
Yeah. Okay.
So
okay.
so
Cool.
the venue
Cool.
has no bearing on my actual job.
Right. Okay. So that's front of house's problem.
Yep. It's not my problem.
Cool. Yeah. No, good to know. And what gear do you use and what do you take on tour with you?
So the gear that I use is 99% of the time, actually, I'm inheriting a playback rig. So I think there's been like 1 or 2 tours where it's actually been my playback rig, and it's an older one. It's like 2 Motu MK3s, and a SW8 switcher. And the laptops are usually provided by the artist. But most of the time, I'm usually working with the iConnectivity Play Audio 12s because they are basically like, it's the interface and the auto switching all contained in one unit, which is nice. On the bigger gigs like Lana Del Rey, there was like 2. The rack that I had was, this was probably a 300-pound rack. And a lot of MIDI equipment, a lot of MIDI interfaces and a lot of, Mio 10s, that type of thing. But it really depends on just who the artist is because 9 times out of 10, I'm inheriting gear that's already been built. But the gear that I always use is I'm always going to use 2 laptops. I'm always going to use 2 audio interfaces, and I'm always going to use a switcher.
Okay. Can you define what a switcher is?
So an audio switcher is basically, it's an output device that has an A and it has a B. So if you think about like an audio interface and say the back of your audio interface has 10 inputs, you would take the outputs of your audio interface and then you would go into the inputs of the switching device. And most switchers are like 8 channels. So there's an extra audio channel just for a 1K tone, and that is what feeds into the auto switching functionality. So if, for example, my A computer crashed, it's going to detect a dropout of that 1K tone, and it's going to automatically switch to the B rig. So that's what a switcher does. It basically just allows you to have that redundancy.
Oh, cool. You've actually answered one of the other questions that we had, which was how do you safeguard against things crashing on tour? So the switcher sounds like the solution.
I am the Department of Redundancy Department. Yes. So, basically, I've had catastrophic train wrecks that have happened to me. And, technology is finicky, but 90% of the time when there is an error, it's usually operational error. It's not technology error. Sometimes I have something soloed and I forgot to unsolo it, or I have something muted, or I didn't turn the volume up. It's usually like stupid things like that. But I have had shows where, my computer A crashed and it switched over to B and it was fine. Nobody knew except for me, who was having a slight panic attack on the side of stage. But also I've had one show where both of my computers crashed, and that was no fault.
Oh my God.
That was no fault of my own. So that's when you have to get on the horn, get on the talkback mic and talk to your artists and say, I'm having a failure. I have to restart the system. Just talk to the audience, banter, give me a couple seconds and we'll be back.
Wow. Oh, that's so intense.
Yeah, but I kind of love it.
It's like the whole room in a way is waiting for you without knowing about it.
Yep. Or if the artist is like, all right, well, we're just waiting for Rayna to get all of her stuff working. I've literally had 12,000 people screaming, Rayna, Rayna, Rayna. And I'm like,
oh my God, that's so
hate
intense.
This.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that would have been an experience, that's for sure.
Not one that I would like to repeat.
Yeah, I'm sure. So is there a standard DAW of choice for playback engineers?
95% 5% of the time it's Ableton. I haven't been doing this, very long. 7 years is really not that long of time. Before Ableton was really the DAW of choice, it used to be, Pro Tools. When I go on, TV shows, I'm often referred to as Pro Tools. I don't take offense to that, and that's fine. And I've actually done playback gigs where I have programmed everything and ran the show in Pro Tools, but I found that 95% of the time it's Ableton, just because of the MIDI functionality. It's the MIDI capability in Ableton is a lot more intuitive than it is in Pro Tools. But then the other DAW that I often use is MainStage, because it's basically, it's like Logic just without the sequencer. So a lot of times if there's like keyboard patches and, changes, if they've been recording using these Logic stock sounds, then I'll just incorporate that into the playback rig.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah, good to know. And Ableton, I guess in a way it's sort of built for live performance. So
I mean, they did put live in the literal title
for a reason, right?
Yeah, that wasn't by coincidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And is there any sort of template that you have for projects? Like, does it all look very similar, or do you always have a certain, number of tracks or something like that for shows? Again,
like I was saying before, 95% of the time I'm inheriting a playback system. So I'm inheriting also a session that's already been built.
Right.
So if it's a session that I'm building just on my own, usually what I'll do is I'll set up, all the sends and returns. But some of the times I don't actually have the hardware in front of me. So in Ableton, I can't actually route things physically until I have the system set up. But
right.
I mean, it's pretty basic. I mean, what I'll do is I'll do a line check, where it's literally like 1, 2, 3, 4, just to make sure that we're getting signal coming out of those lines during line check. I like to color code different sections so I can easily identify what my drums are, what my music are, what the background vocals are. Click tracks, I always create click tracks throughout every single song, even if the artist doesn't want them. It's better to have them on deck and not need them than it is to be like, okay, hold on 1 second, let me just build this real quick. I always like to be like, okay, so they don't want that, I can just mute that, as opposed to being like, all right, I gotta make this real quick. And I also like to use just a blank MIDI track with a MIDI clip in it, and I use it just as for song structure. So for every individual song, let's be like, okay, this chunk that is white is the intro. This chunk that is blue is the verse. This chunk that's purple is the pre-chorus. So in rehearsals, if they say, hey, can you take it to the bridge? You'd be like, sure. I'm going to take it to the bridge. There it is.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, that's useful actually, because they have the markers, but they're not as clear, I guess, as having like a big chunk of red is the chorus or whatever.
Yeah, and especially with Ableton, if you've got a big session, say there's 70 songs in a session, that's a lot to look at. And
it is, yeah.
Yeah, and small lines are very difficult to identify, but big chunks of color are much easier to identify what's going on.
Yeah, no, awesome. So we've talked a lot about what you do as a playback engineer, and this has been hugely eye-opening for me because I knew very little about it. So thank you, Rayna. And I guess now we're living in a bit of a different world. So how have you found managing, what you do in these times? And have you found any alternatives?
Well, I mean, my job predominantly requires traveling 6 to 8 months out of the year. And I haven't been doing that for the past year because we've been in the midst of a global pandemic. So, I've had a couple gigs where it's been like live streaming. I did a couple COVID compliant shows, but it hasn't been anywhere near, the level or, frequency of gigs that I was getting. So, you kind of have to pivot, and that's difficult. And, it's a complete shock to the system. Yeah, I'm just like thinking back to this time last year when I was like, I watched an entire year of gigs completely vanish within 48 hours. and then trying to figure out, okay, so what am I going to do? So, I mean, luckily, I've learned over the years that you should always have a financial cushion, save up for the skinny times when you're in more fatter times, if you will. But what I do when I wasn't on tour, I do a lot of composing for this company called Winter's Rock Entertainment, which is my wife's production company, and it just kind of turned into a thing where all right, I'm here, so let's make some music videos. And actually, we ended up doing a music video for the first artist I ever toured with. Her name is Kaisa. We did a music video called Storm, where we basically coordinated with 124 different drone pilots from around the world. And we did it was basically like a time capsule of what those first initial weeks of lockdown were from all over the world. It was like 25 different countries that we got footage from. We made a little video. Well, we didn't make we made a video, a proper video. It was a proper short film. And then this George Floyd stuff. I mean, I also do photography, and, I'm a Black woman in America, and that's a dangerous demographic to be in, historically. And so I didn't know exactly what my role was going to be, but I knew that I needed to do something. I couldn't just watch all the stuff happen on TV and, on my Twitter feed and on my Instagram feed, just watching these video after video. So I just decided to take a camera and just start taking pictures. And then it turned into a short film, which turned into, getting all these awards and, nominations. But also that's been, connecting with a group of activists in Los Angeles and doing mutual aid. And, basically just realizing that all COVID did was shine a light on all of these deep cracks that already exist in society. There's a lot of intersection between race and gender and class, and these things existed before COVID. But we realized that these systems weren't really built to withstand a catastrophic failure when entire industries break down. So, going back on tour, now there's a lot of focus on the fact that it's very homogenous, and there needs to be diversity, and more people are being hip to that. So a lot of what I've been doing has also been mentoring younger women of color that I'm like, hey, you need to see it to believe it. You need to see it to know that position exists. And also, in the States, touring is the one facet of the entertainment industry that's not unionized. So there's no healthcare, there's no, there's no support system. So I would love to see management and artists, just pay into just basic health coverage for their crew members, because touring is it's a very physically taxing job, but it's also emotionally and mentally taxing. Mental health is a big issue, and not being concerned about those out-of-pocket costs, because in America, our healthcare system is completely it's just terrible. And it's expensive if you don't have an employer that's paying for your health insurance. So these are things that I would love to see, just more diversity and health insurance. I have really, my bar is set pretty low. I just don't want to be the only, woman. I've been the only woman on tour, many tours. It's been like me and like 127 guys, and that's not fun. Or it's been me and maybe 3 other women, and I'm the only woman of color. And I'm definitely the only queer woman of color, So I just would love to.
You're like every minority.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
Sucks. It's awesome, but it sucks.
Yeah. I mean, it's great that, you are doing what you do. And I do really believe that you can't be what you can't see. And I'm sure there are so many, women looking up to you and what you've managed to achieve. And, whether you realize it or not, I'm sure it's having a huge impact in just changing their mentality on what's possible.
Yeah. And I do believe that, the great thing about playback engineering is that it's one of those jobs that are in high demand, but there's a low supply of people that are able to perform at a certain level, So if we can just get more women and minorities and non-gender binary conforming, people, just to make it look more like the audiences, if you will, or that would be great, because this is more artists are realizing that they can't have these really complicated shows without having a designated person whose job it is to make sure that that system runs perfectly every single night.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for taking us a bit into what you've been doing in this new world that we're living in. And it's really great to see that you've been able to pivot and kind of find and thrive in new opportunities. So that's been, great to see. And we have a couple of audience questions for you before we finish up. So there was one from Svenja Sorensen. So she asked, what are the most common mistakes that new playback engineers might make?
Most common mistakes. I would say that it's either overconfidence in their abilities or underconfidence in their abilities. So I've noticed this more with male playback engineers that are just starting off, is that they tend to be pretty overconfident, as we know.
Yeah.
But with women, a lot of the time they're underconfident in their ability to do the job. And the irony is that they're probably a lot more qualified than a lot of the more mid to high level guys. But unfortunately, when you're doing playback, because there is such a high level of trust, you're literally running the show. So you have to have that confidence. And if you don't project that confidence to everybody else around you without being arrogant, then people aren't going to feel confident in your abilities. So it's kind of a fine line that you have to navigate between being confident but not arrogant.
That's good. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. And we had one more, which you've sort of covered already, but that was from Lauren Crumps. So she asked, what are the best ways to gain experience in live events and to start climbing the ladder to bigger events?
I wish that there was some type of template. It's like you want to be a playback engineer, so you go from point A to point B. And I'm a strong believer that anybody who tries to tell you this is a guaranteed way to get into the industry is that it's a grift, because there is no guaranteed way to do anything. So if you're just starting out, the way that I started out doing music is I played in a band. I played in a band when I was in college for 4 years. So that was my first introduction into music, into live performance, into touring. And then for someone who's just starting off now, the best playback engineers are also musicians, are also DJs, are also producers. They have to be able to speak that language. So it could be just working with an artist and doing shows with them. Because literally, if you are running tracks, you are a playback engineer. And it could be just like, you could be running them off an iPad, or a phone. And that's technically playback. You're literally playing back. So, I mean, it's not really sexy when you're doing it off a phone, but, but I mean, working with independent artists and doing shows with them, that gives you that creative control where you become also the music director and you are also the playback engineer.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's important as well to say, like you said, when you're doing something, to actually call yourself that, like if you're starting up as a playback engineer, then actually say that you are one, because I think sometimes, again, and I've seen that as a more female thing, that sometimes they just are scared to take on that title, which then which might reduce the confidence level and then all the kind of flow-on effects to that.
Yeah, and confidence is unfortunately one of those things that you only gain through experience and through failure, and being able to rise above said failure. But I just, as a general rule of thumb, I was reading some study somewhere where it was posted on LinkedIn where they said it was basically like women who have the skills actually only apply for like 60% of the jobs that they think that they can get, whereas like men will apply to like 100% of the jobs where they have 60% of the skills, So it's like, actually we're a lot more smart and capable than we actually think we are. We just need to believe in it,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, I agree. Totally. All right. Well, it's been so lovely chatting to you, Rayna.
Likewise.
And yeah, I'm sure so many people are going to get a unique insight into a few things that they might not have thought about before. So thank you. And is there any more kind of Photoshop things that you're finishing off today, or what's the rest of your day
no more. Yeah, no more Photoshop things. But I do have a Q&A with the Cleveland Film Festival, and it's I'm feeling I feel completely out of my league. I just talked about confidence for the past 10 minutes, and I'm just like, I made this movie because I don't like racism and police brutality.
That sounds pretty solid to me right now.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
What was your process? I don't know. I took a camera and I started yelling at a bunch of cops and I got tear gassed. So yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, no, this has been a really, really lovely conversation, and I hope that more women realize that this is an avenue that they can pursue, because making a living in the music industry is difficult, and this is the only job that I've had where I've been like, okay, I can pay my bills and not have to have a second job in addition to doing this. So.
Yep. Awesome. Well, hopefully this podcast episode will help some people realize that. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.